and welcome to this week's video. This week we'll be focusing on exploring our identities, looking at culture and the implications of our own culture on our identity development. So I'd like to start with this quote here. The quote says, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." Let's take a minute to think about that. Why do you think knowledge of our history, origin, and culture is so important, as identified in this quote? Well, that is what we're going to explore today, and why we really need to understand these elements in order to really understand the roots of who we are and where we come from. So let's continue. We're going to do a waterfall chat. I know we're not together, but what I'd like to do is kind of get your reaction on what you read in Chapter 2. So for Chapter 2 of Teaching Young Children, the focus was a culture. Specifically, the authors defined culture as the ways and manners people use to see, perceive, represent, interpret, and assign value and meaning to the reality they live or experience. So what I'd like you to do is share your reaction to this definition, along with 2 additional insights you gained about culture from reading Chapter 2 by typing a maximum 1 paragraph, 5 to 6 sentence response in the chat tab on Canvas. Now, if we were together, I'd have you all type at the same time, and then when I said go, hit enter, and we have all the chat responses appear. Since we're not together, I'm going to have you just post your response on the chat in Canvas by February 5th, 11:59 p.m. Again, make sure you post your response to this prompt in the chat tab. All right, so let's look at this a little bit more in depth. We're going to look at some of the dimensions of culture shared in our book. And the text talked about what we see makes up part of what our culture is, how we perceive that information, how we interpret it, how we represent ourselves, part of our culture, how we symbolize things, the value, and even how we assign meaning. Each of these dimensions plays a critical role in what our culture is and how it makes us who we are. So last week I talked about our conceptual eye and looking at the personal lens, specifically surface culture, by looking at the observable behaviors. And we completed an activity for that, and I want to kind of review that activity now with you and look at how we get at some of this observable knowledge. So you were each asked to complete identity webs. What I'd like to do is take a moment to look at the completed identity webs. And as I show each web for your peers, I want you to look for categories that were similar to yours or categories that you had not thought of for your identity web. Let me start by saying I was really impressed with your identity webs, and I'm very excited to be able to share this information with you. So we start out here with Turner's identity web. Her main categories are daughter, hobbies, her family, Kansas, culture, jobs, traits, and her education. Well done, Turner. Here's our next one, Anud. Shared hers. I like the visuals she included. She talks about interest. She's from the Middle East. Hobbies, pets. She's a wife. Talked about her family, her education, places she's traveled. Very nice, Anud. All right, our next one's going to be Emma. Emma has lots of great information on her chart. I really liked all the different categories she came up with. Some things like hobbies, traits. She's a friend, a traveler. Music, she attends K-State, a dancer, a daughter. So lots of great information there. Thanks for sharing. Carrie, some great information. Talks about her family, her best friends, stuff she loves. I like that. She's a wife. Miss Barry is a preschool teacher. Dog, Kansas. A lot of good information. Here's Jackie. Jackie again has things like she's a survivor. I really like that. A fiance, congratulations. Hobbies, family, different places she traveled, I believe. Culture, traits, nicely done. Nicole, it has similar categories: traits, education, wife, mother, 3 children, congrats. Her own family, and the places she's been. Very nice. I think these might have been places you've lived. Nicely done. Kristen, it's his daughter, talks about hobbies, Kansas, from farm, like the traits. She's a big family. And then culture. Nice. Jack, talked about his culture, sports, education, family. We're from Kansas, and his traits. Good job. Then we have Kelsey. I love all the visuals you did for your categories, Kelsey. Very nice. Nicely color-coded as well. So lots of great information shared on Kelsey's web here. See anything you connect to. And Parker. We have hobbies. That was from Kansas, I believe. Culture. Survivor. I like that. Traits. Very nicely done. I have Kayla. Kayla is a soon-to-be mom. I'm so excited for her. She's going to have a baby. Student, hobbies. She's from California. Traits, her family. Good job. We have Holly Denton. Nice color. Lots of different decorations on there. I love your web, Holly. She talks about being a student, Christian, mom, wife, daughter, sister, friend. Very good. Love it. And then Francisco, very nice. I love that you use the computer to type in your stuff and create a very visual web here. But we have qualities, that you're born in Panama, hobbies, Spanish your first language, family lives in Panama, different jobs you've done. Well done. And then Bree, again, lots of nice color here. Talked about goals, culture, traits, her readers, mental health, students, hobbies, daughter, places she might have lived, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, different things like that. Nicely done. Like the picture of the kitty cat there too. And Amy, lots of great pictures on Amy's chart here. She talks about home, family, school, sports, travel, jobs, traits, and hobbies. Love all the pictures. Definitely connect with the Disney movie thing as well. Here's Lily's. Again, lots of pictures. She talks about hobbies, daughter, her, let's see, a little bit harder to read, but nicely done. Lots of good information on there, Lily. Thank you. Brooke, and very nice. Lots of good color coding. But she has her education on there, her family, home. She's a learner. She's an athlete. Qualities. Good job. Love the quote you included as well on your web. Corey, Manhattan, talks about things he likes to do or work in Manhattan. Hometown, he's a racer. Family, personality, education. Very nice, Corey. And Corrine, she's from Kansas, her family, she's married. student, substitute teacher. She's her traits, her culture on there. Her enjoyments. Love it. Very good. Nice visuals included as well. We have Kaylee. Kaylee Kelly has her family, faith. She's a wife, a dog mom like that, Cornerstone Church, substitute, travels, singer, hobbies, education. She's a coach. Very nice. Then we have Riley. Thanks for the distinct categories, Riley. I love all the visuals you included as well. She has family, hobbies, travel, labels she gives herself, jobs, sports, academics, and traits. I did comment on Riley saying that I see she's a big Chiefs fan and we're headed to the Super Bowl. Awesome job. Brooke has reading. She's a daughter, music, Kansas, hobbies, daycare. Maybe that's where she teaches. Nicely done, Brooke. Like all the little colorful dots you included as well. Sydney. She's from Kansas. Her traits. Her school background, family, traveling. Nicely done. Lots of travel there. Great job. Jennifer. Talked about her work as a para. That she loves to do different things like cooking and baking. About her family, what she loves being outdoors. She's a wife. Again, congrats, soon to be mommy. That's so exciting. Love for agriculture. Born there, and then 2 dogs and 4 chickens. I did ask Jennifer about the chickens, and she gets fresh eggs, which I'm so jealous. Lauren, very nice, very colorful. She has her categories of family with sister, daughter, pets. I like the hobbies. Talked about her mom and dad, Kansas City, K-State, mental health, traits. Very good. Excellent work. And then Brittany, again, I love the different colors, the different visuals you've included. But you have things about your family, your pets, favorite things, places you've traveled, hobbies. Congratulations on the recent engagement. You see there that she's engaged just in December, and things she enjoys. Well done. And then Savannah, love all the visuals, the color you included. I can tell you're an artist based on these amazing pictures and sketches. But you have on that you're a dog mom. Love that. A teacher, middle, daughter, child, sister. I like that. Traits. You're a reader. From Arkansas. Sorry. Hobbies. Very good. And then Shanae, mother of 2. And then 1 on the way. We have lots of expectant mothers in this class. Very exciting. Passionate, empathy, kindness, nice traits, LGBTQ+, important to you, reading, where you're from, your pronouns, love that. You love to run, your ADHD, married for 10 years, the high school sweetheart, congrats, very nice. Sam, again, great job on your visuals and your color coding, but you talked about your education, you're a dog mom, your friends, or hobbies, I guess you have there. Mother, your family from Nebraska, your survivor, culture, traits, excellent work, love it. And I like this one. Damiana included a picture, which is nice. She's a wife. She talked about her hobbies. She's a mother, her family. Kansas City, Missouri, culture, traits, very good, love it. And then we have Nicole, talked about her religion, nice. Some of her traits, she loves music, travel, she's from a small town, country, she's a junior at K-State, nice that you're emphasizing special ed, well done. Okay, Angelica, again, nice color, nice visuals. She has her hobbies, where she's born, her family, she's a wife. Autism has impacted her. Mental health, well, her family. Mental health, traits, Christian, lots of animals. Love it. I love the cats' names, Fire and Cracker. Very good. And then we have Tana. Nice visuals. Love the different fonts, the different text there. That's great. But you have on here your hobbies, your family, Barton County, your education, traits, your fiance. Congrats on the fiance. So lots of great information there. Thank you for sharing. Megan, love the color coding as you built out on your web. Nicely done. Your main categories are fitness, girlfriend, hobbies, mother, your family, your traits, and your education. Nice job. Danielle, lots of visuals, very colorful. Love the stickers you included and the sketches. But Danielle has categories like summer, hobbies, family. Little description of who you are. Nice job. Love it. Here's our next web. Very nicely done. So I want to make sure. Can't quite see the name on this one, but I love the creativity and how it was created and put together. Excellent job on your tree. Next identity web is Leah. So let me see. Actually, I want to go back to our tree really quick. So that was Brianna, actually. Excellent job, Brianna, on your tree. And then we have Leah, the identity web. Traveler, caregiver, runner, Kansan, fiance. Congrats, you're gonna get married in May. That's so exciting. Your daughter, dog mom, baker, special needs advocate. Love it. Traveler. I love that you've been to Utah, my hometown, or my home state, I should say. Well done. And then Hala, we have K-State, her family, she's a daughter, pets, her family, she's in Kansas, hobbies, culture, and traits. So a lot of webs there that we went through, but I think it's important to get a sense of what your peers did. I think it's great, all the creativity, all the different information you shared, so thank you for that. What I'd like to do now is have you look back at your web and look at some of the elements of cultural identity you included. So just take a minute to pull out your web if you don't have it with you. And then I want you to just put a check mark next to items on your web that fall under any of these elements of cultural identity. So did you put something about your ethnic or national origin? Put a check. Did you put something about your family? Religion? Maybe about your gender? Your educational background? Geographical region, like where you're born or raised? Language? Maybe your age? Socioeconomic status? Job or occupation? These are all elements that make up our cultural identity as shared in chapter 2 of the text. Which ones did you have? More than one? A couple of these? Several of these? What insights can you gain by thinking about what you put and then looking at what your peers put? And then implications for you, not only as a student in this class, but when working with future students. What do you think some of the implications might be? All right, and then our last thing on the identity web, I want you to think for a minute about the benefits. What do you see as the primary benefits of using identity webs with your future students? Adaptations. What adaptations might you make if you were to implement webs in your future classroom? So for example, with kindergartners, first graders, you might do more like pictures or have them cut out things and put on their web, or for older kids, you might have them draw or write. Applications, how much you post or share your students' identities webs. A couple of things I've seen in classrooms, they love that webs are posted on the wall, and then they have kids actually get string and put string between something on their web and something on a peer's web, so that you can see all the connections across the classroom in a visual manner. So one way you might post or share the webs. You can also share them at like family nights. Great for parents to see what kids hold important or believe about their lives and their culture. And then any other thoughts or comments on identity webs? What did you think about this? I hope you found it a good way to learn about surface culture, kind of delve a little bit more deeply into what is your culture. All right. So now we're going to look at shallow culture, those unspoken rules. You have an assignment to help you do this, look at your shallow culture, and that is the identity poem. In order to get a better idea of why we want to look at those identity poems, I want to show you this quick little video on funds of knowledge and how each of us bring specific elements from our home and background that shape us. So let's listen to Louise Moll, one of the creators of the funds of knowledge concept, and get a better idea of this.
I'm Louise Moll, and I'm a professor at the University of Arizona. For several years, we have worked with a concept that we call funds of knowledge. And funds of knowledge has to do with the knowledge base generated by families on the basis of their experiences, especially their work experiences, their social practices, and their social history. So part of the strategies that we use is to visit households and get to know the families, whether we become the learners as opposed to the teachers in that context, in order to document the knowledge base through, as laid out by the experiences of the families that we're working with. There are several advantages, we think, to such an approach, and we're pleased that colleagues in not only in different parts of the U.S., but in other countries are using the concept and adapting it to their own realities. And one of the most interesting areas for development on the use of the concept, I think, is through Head Start activities or other early childhood activities and programs, where the teachers could develop the documentation of funds of knowledge, not only with the families, but with the kids. And also the documentation of funds of knowledge of the teachers themselves. It is very important, I think, especially in an early childhood or in a Head Start context, to understand how teachers' experiences, life experiences, interact with the academic knowledge and pedagogical knowledge and concepts they're supposed to master as professional educators. There's always a filter in acquiring these more academic concepts, and that filter are the social and emotional experiences of our lives. So in a sense, the teacher's funds of knowledge become part and parcel of that element needed to assimilate the pedagogical knowledge and become an outstanding teacher.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that clip on the funds of knowledge. As Louise Moll points out, it's really about understanding where you're from, understanding your identity, because that's going to influence how you view and interact with others, particularly the students you'll be working with. So to help us get at a deeper level of understanding, you're going to do the identity poem. With this, there's a template on your week 1 course module for the identity poem. If you click on the identity poem, it'll open up a document template for you. This is where I'm from. So this is an example of the original writer of these poems, George Ella Lyon. Remember, for your identity poem, you're going to post your completed poem by this Friday, February 5th. Note that the template for your identity poem is found in the week 1 course module. And the template, when you click on identity poem, it's going to say I am from poem template. It's the same thing. So make sure you complete that type it up and post it in the identity poem. I shared my identity poem with you last week. Make sure you kind of review that to get a sense of what to do. And again, be creative with putting your identity poem together, how you type it up. If you want to add a visual to that, like a picture, that would be fine as well. All right, and then now that we've talked about surface culture and shallow culture, I want to talk about what you're going to do to get at deep culture. Help us have a better understanding of your deep culture. So in order to do that, you'll have one more assignment you're going to work on this week. This assignment's not going to be due till next week, though. You're going to work on a cultural lens flip grid. So in your cultural lens flip grid, you'll need to critically reflect on and completely answer at least 2 of the questions below. So here are the questions. I don't want you to forget those questions. So if you go into the course module, let me go back to our course module here. If we go into your Canvas course, you'll see for week 2, you have the cultural lens flip grid questions here. So if you click on that, it will open up the exact same questions that were on the slide I was just showing you. Make sure you pick 2 of those to answer. And then if you go back into the modules tab, you'll see the link for the flip grid. So all you need to do is click on the cultural lens flip grid link, open it up, and you're just going to record your responses by clicking on the button and here to record a response and add it. So that's the cultural lens flip grid assignment. Again, as I said, that will help us get at a deeper level of understanding when it comes to that deep culture. All right, now what I'd like to do before we end today is have you just listen to this one presentation. It's an excellent reiteration of why we don't want to get caught in the trap of thinking about cultures as one-dimensional or not having a culture or the impacts of making assumptions about a culture can have. So some of you may have seen this video before. If you have, just watch it again, kind of thinking with that lens of what we've been talking about this week, culture and its implications on our own identities. So we'll watch this and then we will come back and wrap up.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination. They opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this. It saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this. She had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me, as an African, was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature. Now, here's a quote from the writing of a London merchant called John Locke, who sailed to West Africa in 1561 and kept a fascinating account of his voyage. After referring to the Black Africans as beasts who have no houses, he writes, "They are also people without heads, having their mouths and eyes in their breasts." Now, I've laughed every time I've read this, and one must admire the imagination of John Locke. But what is important about his writing is that it represents the beginning of a tradition of telling African stories in the West, a tradition of sub-Saharan Africa as a place of negatives, of difference, of darkness, of people who, in the words of the wonderful poet, Rudyard Kipling, are half devil, half child. And so I began to realize that my American roommate must have, throughout her life, seen and heard different versions of this single story. As had a professor who once told me that my novel was not authentically African. Now, I was quite willing to contend that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, that it had failed in a number of places, but I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving something called African authenticity. In fact, I did not know what African authenticity was. The professor told me that my characters were too much like him, an educated and middle-class man. My characters drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not authentically African. But I must quickly add that I, too, am just as guilty on the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And, as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were fleecing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. I recently spoke at a university where a student told me that it was such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. Now, obviously, I said this in a fit of mild irritation, but it would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. And now, this is not because I'm a better person than that student, but because of America's cultural and economic power, I had many stories of America. I had read Tylan, Updike, and Steinbeck, and Gateskill. I did not have a single story of America. When I learned some years ago that writers were expected to have had really unhappy childhoods to be successful, I began to think about how I could invent horrible things my parents had done to me. But the truth is that I had a very happy childhood, full of laughter and love, in a very close-knit family. But I also had grandfathers who died in refugee camps. My cousin, Polly, died because he could not get adequate health care. One of my closest friends, Ukoloma, died in a plane crash because our fire trucks did not have water. I grew up under repressive military governments that devalued education so that sometimes my parents were not paid their salaries. And so as a child, I saw jam disappear from the breakfast table. Then margarine disappeared. Then bread became too expensive. Then milk became rationed. And most of all, a kind of normalized political fear invaded our lives. All of these stories make me who I am. But to insist on only these negative stories is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Of course, Africa is a continent full of catastrophes, the immense ones, such as the horrific rapes in Congo, and depressing ones, such as the fact that 5,000 people apply for one job vacancy in Nigeria. But there are other stories that are not about catastrophe, and it's very important, it is just as important to talk about them. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. So what if before my Mexican trip, I had followed the immigration debate from both sides, the US and the Mexican? What if my mother had told us that Fide's family was poor and hardworking? What if we had an African television network that broadcast diverse African stories all over the world, what the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe calls a balance of stories? What if my roommate knew about my Nigerian publisher, Mukhtar Bakare, a remarkable man who left his job in a bank to follow his dream and start a publishing house? Now, the conventional wisdom was that Nigerians don't read literature. He disagreed. He felt that people who could read would read if you made literature affordable and available to them. Shortly after he published my first novel, I went to a TV station in Lagos to do an interview. And a woman who worked there as a messenger came up to me and said, "I really liked your novel. I didn't like the ending. Now you must write a sequel, and this is what will happen." And she went on to tell me what to write in the sequel. Now, I was not only charmed, I was very moved. Here was a woman, part of the ordinary masses of Nigerians who were not supposed to be readers. She had not only read the book, but she had taken ownership of it and felt justified in telling me what to write in the sequel. Now, what if my roommate knew about my friend, Fumi Yonda, a fearless woman who hosts a TV show in Lagos and is determined to tell the stories that we prefer to forget? What if my roommate knew about the heart procedure that was performed in the Lagos hospital last week? What if my roommate knew about contemporary Nigerian music, talented people singing in English and Pidgin and Igbo and Yoruba and Ijo, mixing influences from Jay-Z to Fela to Bob Marley to their grandfathers? What if my roommate knew about the female lawyer who recently went to court in Nigeria to challenge a ridiculous law that required women to get their husband's consent before renewing their passports? What if my roommate knew about Nollywood, full of innovative people making films despite great technical odds? Films so popular that they really are the best example of Nigerians consuming what they produce. What if my roommate knew about my wonderfully ambitious hair braider who has just started her own business selling hair extensions? Or about the millions of other Nigerians who start businesses and sometimes fail, but continue to nurse ambition? Every time I am home, I'm confronted with the usual sources of irritation for most Nigerians: our failed infrastructure, our failed government, but also by the incredible resilience of people who thrive despite the government rather than because of it. I teach writing workshops in Lagos every summer, and it is amazing to me how many people apply, how many people are eager to write, to tell stories. My Nigerian publisher and I have just started a nonprofit called Farafina Trust, and we have big dreams of building libraries and refurbishing libraries that already exist and providing books for state schools that don't have anything in their libraries, and also of organizing lots and lots of workshops on reading and writing for all the people who are eager to tell our many stories. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. The American writer Alice Walker wrote this about her southern relatives who had moved to the north, and she introduced them to a book about the southern life that they had left behind. They sat around reading the book themselves, listening to me read the book, and a kind of paradise was regained. I would like to end with this thought, that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that video. I think she has a lot of really powerful ideas to share, a lot of great information, and how we really need to be careful of the danger of that single story, not only about our own lives, but about the lives of our future students. All right, so we're going to end there. I just want to have a few quick reminders for you. This week you need to sign up for a book to read for the critical book review assignment. That is under the Pages tab. So make sure you go there, or it's also, there's a link for it in your week 2 course module. So if you click on the modules, you'll see in week 2, the critical book review sign up tab is right there. You also need to complete the cultural lens Flipgrid. The required prompts for that, remember I shared those with you. Those are in your course module as well. Here's the questions, and here's the link under the week 2 course module. Then if you signed up for the culturally responsive teaching discussion board to be one of the people to post about an article, you need to make sure to read that and post your response. And those are actually posted in the week 2 article, not the week 2 module, not the week 3. So again, if you go back, you'll see here's discussion board article 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you've signed up for one of those, just go by the one you signed up for. Write your post, and you're going to post that under the discussion board tab. You'll see the discussion board right here for CRT discussion board. So each person will do their post, and then you'll be able to, if you're not posting, you'll be able to reply to those posts this next week. So let's go back to that. If you're not writing a post, you're going to write or Zoom your response on the date posted on the course schedule, so make sure you check that out. For the discussion board Zoom time, based on the CLD biography feedback, we're going to have that Friday, February 12th at 7:30 for the culturally responsive teaching discussion board. So if you have not had a chance or do not want to write it, you can Zoom in on Friday, February 12th to talk about it. Once you talk about those articles in the Zoom, you will get credit for that discussion board response. All right, I think that's it for now. Thank you guys so much. Hope we have a great week 2. Any questions, shoot me an email, let me know, and talk to you soon.